When life throws you a curveball, how are you going to handle adversity? Welcome to the Fearless Mindset Podcast, where you're about to go on a journey as I interview security, business, and entertainment leaders on what it takes to stay fearless. I'm your host, Mark Ledlow, and enjoy today's episode.
Now, the audience is probably wanting to know more about your CIA days because you spent time in the CIA. So we'll probably touch on that a little bit. What was your most favorite time? What was your favorite memories or fondest memories of being in the CIA? What were the things that made you get up in the morning and be excited?
There were a couple things. My first 6 years was what they called Office of Security. They still have that now. You know, you do the background investigations for people wanting to come to the agency. But you did what they call operational support work, which was a blast because those are the days during the Cold War when we'd have defectors. And your job in OS was to protect these defectors, you know. And that was a lot of fun, you know. And then another period of time before I left security, went over to the dark side, you know, the clandestine side of the house, the DO, operations director. I spent 2 years on CIA Director Casey's security detail. And that was a lot of fun. Made some lifelong friends, traveled the world, you know, went to the White House. We were credentialed by the Secret Service so we could carry firearms, obviously, onto the White House. But, you know, went to the White House, Pentagon, Capitol Hill, State Department, overseas. It was a wonderful experience for a guy like me who was in my, you know, at that mid to late 20s.
Wow.
And yeah, it was I got to meet a lot of heavy hitters, you know, which led us actually to go into this new entity called CTC, Counterterrorism Center, which was created in '86. And it was the first time they melded operations and analysts together to fight bad guys. Yeah. Because back in the day, and I always use an example, let's say you're working the Japan desk and you're Japan desk operations, Japan desk analysts. There'd literally be a wall and locked doors between the two because operators didn't trust analysts. They thought they talked too much, couldn't keep secrets, and analysts thought operators were a bunch of knuckle draggers, right? You know, and but we melded the two, and it was beautiful. And I was a CTC person for most of my career. That's where I met Rick and Trot and all these other folks. And I guess one of the biggest things for me, if you ask that, go back to your original question, was the time I spent. Well, there were two. One, I had one organization where we went around the world working with foreign liaison organizations to make them better, and it was a great. Got you know, Africa and Asia. I got to go all over the world, but I guess what I remember most fondly is my day in the Philippines. I spent 2 to 3 years in the Philippines. That's where I met Rick. We were up against a group called the NPA, New People's Army. You know, they were an offshoot of the Communist Party of the Philippines. We had 2 major military bases there, Clark Air Force Base, Subic Naval Base. They were killing sailors and airmen left and right in the cities outside of the bases, and they were killing Philippine military and police. The big one was they killed Colonel Nick Rowe. Nick was famous in the Green Beret Special Ops community. Yeah. He had been a POW, right, in Vietnam, 5 years and escaped. He wrote a book, 5 Years to Freedom. His techniques are used in the survival, escape, resistance, evasion courses in Fort Bragg.
Wow.
And he was murdered by NPA hit squad on his way into work in Manila.
Wow.
And that's when we knew. That's a couple months before we all arrived. But those are wonderful days, not in the sense that it wasn't wonderful in the sense that Americans and our allies were getting killed, but it was wonderful the way we rallied as an organization, not just CIA, but within the Embassy, State Department, FBI, OSI, Air Force, Naval Intelligence Service, Investigative Service. We all worked together, and we took it to the bad guys. They never killed another American in Manila. And we also were able to hopefully morph our model to Clark and Subic. But those are dangerous times. We were all carrying guns, driving armored cars, credentialed by the local police and intelligence. And we worked a lot of joint operations. But it was my first taste of real terrorism. And it was almost like being a cop again, you know, but just in a different realm. But yeah, that was probably a real seminal moment in my time. But from a leadership perspective, I'll add one more. And that was when I actually got away from operations for a few years. And I was asked to go into, I can't remember what they call it now, personnel, I'll say personnel, or their version of HR, career development staff. And we helped develop the first career development program for operations officers. And we started the first mentoring program, which started me on a lifelong love of mentoring. So I did that for a little bit. And I remember my operations colleague said, "What the hell are you going into personnel for?" And I said, I'm learning, right? And then I went into Office of Military Affairs as an executive officer, which was a blend of military and CIA people working together to help prepare military people to go overseas and understand what the agency does for a living. And then I went to the Inspector General's office as an investigator. And so those experiences taught me things I wouldn't have learned had I just stayed in the operations directorate. I eventually went back and finished out my career in operations. But those experiences, those 3 or 4 years, I wouldn't trade for anything, because it taught me new skills, gave me an awareness of what other people do in the agency. So it's not just about, the operations folks. We are collectively working together to keep Americans safe around the world. And I've got a better appreciation for the agency in those 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, because I know Rick had him on the podcast, and he said the reason why he wrote his book was because he got tired of the Hollywood description of what the CIA really is. It's not Jack Reeder. It's not Jason Bourne. It's totally not that at all. But Hollywood got to synthesize it to make the movie interesting, obviously. Right. And would you agree with him? It's just Hollywood makes the CIA look something like it's completely not. Would you agree with that thought process?
Yeah, I mean, I joke with my wife all the time. We'll watch movies, and first of all, they use the wrong nomenclature, which I put in my new book. They call them agents, right? Agents are who we recruit. Jason Bourne, CIA agent. No, he's a CIA officer. That's the difference, right?
Okay.
Yeah, but they do. They embellish a lot. So most agency officers, for instance, you're trained how to use firearms, but you may go through a whole career and never carry a firearm. I was different. We were a different category, right, back then, and so we tended to have more times when we either carried weapons or were around weapons than maybe other folks. There are 3 movies I recommend actually for people who want to get a sense of the real CIA, right? Okay. We just saw it the other day. There's Spy Game with Robert Redford and Brad Pitt, because it goes through 3 different vignettes. Vietnam, Cold War, Berlin, and then, Hezbollah in the 80s. But Redford's character and how he approaches his work as a CIA officer, and Pitt's being very good at his job, but starting to realize I'm not sure if I like what it takes to be a case officer, right? Is really good. The other one is The Good Shepherd with Matt Damon, because it starts in World War. Yeah, right. It starts off in World War II, and then the early days of the agency, and fairly realistic in the way how tough it must have been back in those days. It's pretty life and death. And then the third one is with Colin Farrell and Al Pacino, The Recruit. And The Recruit was the only film that the agency allowed some filming at our training facility. But again, there are things when they show the training, things that are not necessarily true. Like, you don't get beat up if you go through an interrogation training and that kind of stuff. But those 3 actually are gives you a sense of what the agency is all about. It's fun to watch the Bourne Identity movies. It's fun to watch all these things. I love it.
Sure.
But it gives people a false sense. Of what the agency is all about. We're really about gathering intelligence, so we can give it to the policymakers. So hopefully they make reasoned decisions on policy or national security or what have you. Sure, there's a covert action element that can do a lot of things around the world that need to be done. But you don't have a bunch of gunslingers running around the world, wearing tuxedos and, driving Ferraris, right?
Right.
Like you never see Jason Bourne doing an expense report,
Never. It's always the Krav Maga move and throwing people off sky cranes or something, or scuba diving or something. It's crazy. But yeah, we live in a time where, I have to tell people, like, the CIA agency is probably the most powerful agency in the United States of America, because they're doing so many things on behalf of the U.S. to keep American interests safe globally. And they have to have these agents or officers globally around the world so they can get intel reports and give those intel reports to maybe special forces groups or, like what you said, policymakers. And I don't think the audience really understands how needed the CIA really is.
Yeah. I mean, and I think they don't really have an appreciation for typical CIA officer maybe in their late 20s, early 30s, somewhere around the world, meeting an asset that might provide them information. Could be a terrorist asset, could be something else. They've got to do surveillance detection before they meet the asset. They never know if the asset's going to be a double agent, I'm going to turn them in. There's all these, and usually I've worked with the Bureau and Secret Service on this, but a lot of times they have a safety net in terms of you've got SWAT teams and other things around you as an undercover is making a meeting. You're on your own as an agency officer. You rarely have backup, or surveillance. Once in a while, maybe. And so it's by your own wits and by your savvy and your training that keeps you safe in places. And there are a lot of wonderful men and women working for the agency that are working in some very dark and dangerous places as we speak, getting the information, hopefully, that will forestall the next terrorist attack, or getting information that will help someone in the White House make a decision on China or what have you, right? It's a lot of responsibility for a lot of these young folks. And so you got to give them a lot of credit for what they do.
Wow. Yeah, that's true. I'm always thinking, hey, when's the next terrorist attack going to hit? We had 9/11, almost 20 years ago now? It's crazy. Right. Time flies.
I know, right?
It's like 20. Wow. 9/11 just, that was like, it seems like it was yesterday, but we haven't really been hit since then, which is, a token to our appreciation to our law enforcement agencies keeping us safe globally. Otherwise, I'm sure we would have got hit by now. And that's why we need those folks in those roles to keep our business interests safe. It's just a dangerous place. The world's getting dangerous every day of the year.
Right, exactly. And it's coming back to, again, a point that you brought out a while ago. If you keep cutting on the physical security side, remember, physical security CSOs are the ones that have the nexus, for the most part, with a lot of the federal government. So there's a thing called OSAC. Have you heard of OSAC?
I'm a member of OSAC.
Yeah, right. So OSAC. So OSAC is essential, right? It's made up of CSOs and their teams working with OSAC. So you cut back on the footprint of these companies and their security footprint, then you have less interface at a certain level with OSAC, which is, OSAC was a godsend. I mean, my team loved OSAC because in every country you'd have country council meetings, share information. I would often speak to OSAC councils when I was traveling, and it was a pleasure to deal with the regional security officers and know that we were working together to keep not just Microsoft, but the American citizens safe in these countries. And again, it's an education piece on the part of the CSOs, right? If they don't talk to the C-suite about, hey, I'm part of OSAC. This is what OSAC is all about. I remember as I was leaving Microsoft, OSAC sent Satya Nadella, our CSO, and eventually got back to me, a letter just talking about my years of work with OSAC and how valuable it was. And I said, those kind of things, I think, help bolster the global security organization. But you have to educate these folks. They don't know anything about OSAC,
They don't.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. I really didn't realize how big a deal OSAC was until I, started, building a security company. Like, oh, wow, the State Department does that globally? I'm like, I had no clue. I'm like, oh, shoot, that's a great resource. And for the audience, if you're listening, OSAC, if you want to explain what OSAC is for enterprise, Mike, go for it.
Yeah, so OSAC stands for Overseas Advisory Council. It was started in the 80s by George Shultz, who was Secretary of State to Ronald Reagan. And the idea was, those of you who don't understand the way the government is structured, especially State Department, obviously embassies all around the world. The embassies have what they call regional security officers. They're part of diplomatic security and within State Department. And their job is to keep U.S. citizens safe in that particular country. So OSAC was formed because let's say it's the Philippines, and you've got X number of American companies in the Philippines represented. You've got the regional security officer and his or her staff at the embassy. The idea was to meld those two together, have regular meetings, exchange information. State Department talk to them about the threats that they see. Maybe they can tell the State Department about this is what we're seeing, and we're exchanging information to keep everybody safe. And that just blossomed into this wonderful organization. I was lucky to be part of a core council of 30 CSOs. We ran committees along with our State Department colleagues for years, coming up with policies and procedures and ways we could better share information with each other. There are councils all around the world. So in my case, let's say I have global security people in Mexico. So there's a country council in Mexico. They would meet with the regional security officer and his or her staff on a regular basis for OSAC council meetings. So it was a beautiful, it's a really well thought out program, and it's really one of the successful models of public sector, private sector partnerships, so much so that the FBI has replicated that with DSAC, Domestic Security Alliance Council.
Oh, that's right.
So they started their own entity, probably more looking at the domestic issues with U.S. companies. So OSAC was great. I look fondly back on those days at OSAC.
Yeah, as far as I did was become a member of that, with having a security company and all that. Just going to the annual briefing they have in November in DC.
Oh, right, yeah.
But yeah, it's a great way to expand your knowledge of this business and how it is globally. And now you launch. When did your book launch? Your fiction book that comes out pretty soon, or it already has?
It came out. I'm losing track of time. It came out in March.
Okay.
It's gotten some good reviews on Amazon. So I'm 8 chapters into the sequel because I'm making it a series, and people want to see what happens to my character Jack Trench.
Nice.
So I'm busy banging away on that, and I'll probably, from a leadership perspective, I may get back to that at some point. But I'm concentrating on podcasts, as well as I do a weekly blog on leadership on LinkedIn, and so I'm kind of using that in Twitter and social media to kind of push the leadership narrative, while I'm concentrating on the fiction writing right now.
Dang. Would you ever imagine you'd have to be on all these social media platforms to drive your business? Is it crazy or what?
It is. I think my first foray into that was at Microsoft when I started Twitter, and eventually started growing my Twitter account, but then realized the force multiplying effect of the people you touch on Twitter when you post something and they come back to you, and then they spread the word, and next thing you know, and at that time, a lot of it was promoting global security, promoting Microsoft, and so we did that. But no, I never thought that, and you have to be very disciplined in how you do it. You can't be scattershot, as you well know. I mean, you've got Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn. So you have to figure out what lane you really want to play in, or if you want to play in all of them, what does each lane do for you? What is it can do for you to promote your brand? I have a great gal named Kayla Williams, who you've had some contact with. She's a social media person and digital marketing, and my business manager. A lot of the marketing comes from her. I couldn't do it. I mean, a lot of times I'll see something on somebody will post, ping me, "Hey man, that's a great thing that you did on Instagram." I said, "Huh?" I go on Instagram. I don't know. It looks good, but I didn't do it. That was Kayla and the team that did it, right?
Smart man there.
Yeah. If I did it, it'd all look all cockeyed and the colors would be off and, misspelled words and everything.
You're smart. And that's what I had to do about a year ago, because I was realizing the hours I was spending on social media just on my content for my pages. And I'm like, it was probably 30 hours a week in addition to, running details around the country. And I'm like, wait a minute. So I did what Mike did. I hired a manager. She runs all my platform stuff. Maybe 10% of what you see out there is me, but 90% of it mainly her. But I don't have time to run that stuff. I think Mike, I misspell words and the graphics be all off and duct taped together and look really messy if I did it.
But your job is to be strategic, right? I mean, you're running a company, and so you don't have time for that.
Right. And where can the audience find you, Mike, as far as if they need leadership coaching with their organization, where can they find you online, and what your recommendation for that?
Yeah, the easiest way is just to go to mikehowardauthor.com. That's a one-stop shop. And so if they want to connect with me, there's a link that they can connect with me. We could set up some time. It has links to all my books, my podcast that I do, that type of thing. So mikehowardauthor.com is the easiest way to get a hold of me, or if you have a question or whatever, feedback.
Now, how has LinkedIn, has it been a powerful tool for your business and for your books and all that? Or is this more for just credibility, LinkedIn?
I think a bit of both. I mean, when I retired, I already had a pretty big LinkedIn presence. And I do a lot on LinkedIn. I really like it a lot. But when I got into the writing and all this, it's really helped out a lot, because I usually try to do a daily inject of some leadership content, which keeps you, kind of there every day, and the weekly blog. But I also promote my books on there. I'll put in articles on stoicism, because I love stoicism. So I'll pop stuff in there. I'll just put content in there that always relates to leadership, but a lot of times it comes back to my books. And I found it to be really helpful. I've gotten more followers. I got a lot more queries, and a lot of direct messaging, and being able to, do podcasts like yours and others. It's been great. And I love it. It probably, if I look at all the social media things that I actively, like I said, I'm on all platforms, but LinkedIn is probably where I work the most. That's probably where I do most of my stuff. And actually more hands-on stuff. Kayla does a lot of it, but I do a lot of hands-on stuff in LinkedIn. I'm comfortable with it. I understand it. And it's where a lot of my colleagues and people I know throughout the years and the decades, that's where they live too. So it's a sweet spot for me.
Also owned by Microsoft.
Yes, right. Exactly. That too.
That was a great move by Microsoft to buy LinkedIn. That was really good strategically.
Yeah, it is. We actually ended up, one of the guys, Rick Pence, who worked on investigations, ran investigations, he ended up becoming the CSO down there. And
oh, no way. Wow.
Yeah, during the integration, I remember going down there and just seeing they're really cool company. I'm really glad we bought them. It was good. It was a really good acquisition. Unlike Nokia, which was a lousy acquisition.
Nokia. I haven't heard that name in years. Probably a reason why.
Yeah, I wonder why.
But it just shows you how technology has changed the way we do business. It's just not, go to a mixer and have some drinks and some snacks. It's like how powerful, if you use it correctly, it can be a powerful tool for your business, for your book writing, for your leadership business. And it's just, and podcasting. I think podcasting, is now more listened to than network news now, because the young people just don't trust network news anymore. They're just like, they think it's garbage. So
right.
They listen to our podcast.
Yeah. How long have you been podcasting?
I will be 3 years in August.
Wow. That's a lot. That's longer than I have been. So, wow. Good for you.
Thank you. Yeah. My, Chris Decker with Salescast, he says, well, the world's shut down. What are you going to do now? I'm like, I have no idea. I had no idea. I'm like, have you thought about podcasts? I'm like, a what? A podcast. Joe Rogan? Like, who's he? Who's that? I had no idea. I jumped in. I remember Mike Trott. I was like, I'll be your guinea pig. I'll help you launch this thing. I'm like, all right, I appreciate it. I was so freaking nervous. I was sweating my first one. I was on video and you had that little camera looking at you. And I remember like it was yesterday, Mike was just he was laughing. I think he was more entertained about it than I was. And
he was probably having a good time watching you sweat.
He was. You probably ask him now. Yeah, I was watching him sweat. I can see little things coming off his forehead. He was, I remember it took me about 20 episodes. And I'm like, what are you so nervous about? Just, have a conversation.
Yeah, just talking to people. That's all.
It is. And now I realize that, this digital form that we're in is more powerful than I could ever have dreamed. Like I had one guy on, Zach. He was the head of security at Balboa Bay Resort in Newport Beach. He went and did an interview. I think right after we did a podcast, and they walked to the door and everybody knew him from his podcast. And then boom, he nailed the interview, and he's now head of security at Falcon Hill Resort. He goes,
"Is that right? Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah." He's like the other guy in charge of him, the CSO, is like the guy in charge of Irvine Company.
Jeez.
And the guy has no law enforcement background, no military background. He's just a good politician. And everybody said, "Oh yeah, I loved your podcast, by the way." Next thing you know, "Hey Mark, they gave me the job." I'm like, "Congrats, brother. Congrats."
You never know. You do these things. You never know who you're going to touch, who's going to touch you and maybe help you out and help your career or whatever goals you're trying to get, or vice versa. And I love it. It's a powerful medium. And I could see what you're saying. I actually never thought about what you said about younger folks not really watching the news, because I don't like watching news much anymore either, because you can't trust anybody. So
I'm right there with you, Mike. I just like, after the elections and all that, I'm like, you know what? I can put more positive things in my mind and be more productive. And so if I give my audience some true facts of what the industry is doing from a credible source like yourself, or inspire some vets, some law enforcement folks, and listen to a story from you, I'd rather do that than listen to an hour of whatever network news is out there. It's just more beneficial, more fun.
Yeah, I'm with you, brother. I'm with you on that one.
Any parting words for the audience, Mike, before we wrap this up? I know you got probably a busy day over there in Vegas and everything you're doing, but any parting words of advice?
Well, first of all, thank you, Mark, for giving me the opportunity. This is, like I said earlier, and I'm not just blowing smoke here. It's an honor. I know the caliber of guests that you have on your show, so having me included is it's really great. So I thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Thank you. So I did a recent blog post revisiting Colin Powell's 13 Rules of Leadership. For those of your audience that haven't heard, Colin Powell, when he was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, used to keep 3x5 cards on his desk, and over a period of time, he wrote these things, different leadership sayings, and he extrapolated that into a book, and it's become famous. You look it up online; they're everywhere. Last week, I saw on YouTube an interview that Powell did with, I think they were like, there was a national organization of county commissioners, and he was being interviewed. It was a great interview, and I think I popped it into LinkedIn. So if you have my LinkedIn feed, you'll find the link there. But it just renewed, this, what kind of leader he was. I was able to moderate a session with him at a security conference years ago with CSOs, and that was one of the highlights of my career. But out of these 13 sayings, a couple of them struck me. As number one was, "It'll look better in the AM," and I like that because it may not look better in the AM, and things may be worse in the AM. But you have to have the mindset for you and your troops, as he said, that it'll look better in the AM and that it can be done. But the one I really like is the perpetual optimism is a force multiplier. You as a leader, there are days when you're dragging ass and it's not working or you're just not feeling it. But for your troops, they can't see that,
Exactly.
They need to see you positive and can do, and no matter what obstacles are in front of you, you as a team can nail this thing together. And so, by promoting that optimism within your organization, it truly is a force multiplier. It teaches people that, yeah, there are going to be hard times, hard days, crisis situations that are going to test you and pull you in all different directions. But if you know that as a team, you're working well together and you have the optimism and know that this is going to work out in the end, that means everything. And so if I can leave that with your audience, is remember perpetual optimism is a force multiplier. And that's not from me. That's from dearly departed General Colin Powell, who is one of the finest leaders this country, this world has ever seen or produced.
Amen.
And if it was good enough for him, it's good enough for us.
I read his book, his first book, autobiography. I read that thing right straight through. Great stories, amazing stories.
Oh yeah, I mean, just what a leader. I mean, just think if we had in the government more people like Colin Powell, it'd be a better functioning government, and they would learn to work with each other across party lines as opposed to now they don't even talk to each other, right?
Absolutely. And you brought up the interesting fact, Mike. I actually practice that process. I don't know where I learned it from, but you have a crisis as a company. I'm running a company. How big is that crisis? Well, don't you typically being a Marine, I want to pull that trigger and make a decision right then and there. But if it's a crisis, does it really need to be solved now or wait 24 hours and then reassess it, investigate, and let the emotions flow, because you're going to have all kinds of emotions in the 24-hour period. First, you're going to be mad, you're going to be angry, but you're probably not going to make the same decision and choice 24 hours later.
Exactly.
And I've learned to take a step back, not react, but process through the emotions and the facts and make a sound business decision in 24 hours later versus making a decision right then and there. Because I ask myself, does that fire have to be put out now? Is it critical? How bad is it? Probably not the best way to describe that process, but would you describe that's kind of what you would advise business leaders to do?
Yeah, I do. And as you were talking about, it just comes to mind when we've had crisis situations at Microsoft, for instance, inevitably someone on the C-suite said, hey, what's happening? What's happening? What's happening? What's happening? Right. And so over a period of time with our partners within the enterprise, we developed a crisis management, incident management team, we call it IMT structure, where you'll look at, okay, the who, what, when, where, why, how. What are the main strategic issues that we have to deal with right now? Is it life safety? Is it reputational? Is it legal? And then what are the action items that we have to do? And then we just kind of revisit that circle. But part of that was you do training on a regular basis. We did it maybe 3 times a year with our partners in legal, HR, PR, et cetera. Again, your major stakeholders who then, when the balloon goes up, rather than make that knee-jerk reaction, they know the process. And if someone from legal, the head chief of legal or chief of HR, hey, what's going on? This is the process. There are people who tell them, this is the process. We're going through the process right now. We're working the issue. We'll get you the answer, when we have the right answer, right? And so it is. A lot of people is like, oh, as a balloon goes up, oh, we got to figure like chickens with your head cut off. And you hit the nail on the point. Hit the nail on the head. In a crisis, you're jacked up. Like you said, you could be angry, frustrated, stressed, or whatever. Not exactly the best formula for making a decision. Now, the flip side of that is, you're a Marine. I was a cop. You often have to make decisions in stressful situations, but you've been trained for that, right? And a lot of times in crisis situations, the C-suite, they're not necessarily trained in that kind of stuff. And so their reaction is going to be more knee-jerk, especially if they're getting queries from the press about a bomb going off somewhere or blah, blah, blah. And so you've got to educate them, but you're spot on. You have to take that step back. What are the strategic issues? What has to be put out right now? And if something doesn't have to be put out right now, that's fine. If it does, fine. Deal with it. But it has to be a measured response, not a knee-jerk reaction.
Measured response. Yeah. I like that. Measured response. That was a multi-million-dollar advice, folks. For you business leaders running multi-million-dollar operations, that was your gold nugget for the day from Mike Howard. And if you guys are tuning in, please follow us on all the podcast platforms. Follow Mike Howard on his podcast platform too. Check out his book.
Thank you.
And purchase that on Amazon. And follow us on YouTube. You can find me on YouTube as well. Subscribe to that. Make a comment. Tell us we're a bunch of idiots and help the algorithms. I'm fine with that. And just thanks for tuning in. And thanks for being part of the show and supporting the show if you're in the audience. And if it wasn't for my guests like Mike Howard and many others I've had, this show would not exist. And the whole purpose mission of the podcast is to support our troops, our veterans, and our law enforcement officers, and just give them some hope and advice in this crazy security industry that we're in. And for Mike Howard's perspective, he's writing books and he's also leading companies with the running leadership strategies. So plug in him on that. So tune in if you need advice for leading your organization. Reach out to Mike Howard to get advice on how to be a good CEO, be a good leader, be a good C-suite. I'm sure he can actually offer you some great expertise and opinions and knowledge on that. So thanks for tuning in, folks, and thanks for your time. And we'll see you on the next Fearless Mindset podcast. We'll see you soon.